Day, on 54 years ago, on the first Earth Day. Now, the first Earth Day was 54 years ago, but it's the 55th Earth Day because the first one was on 1970, so there's no kind of year zero. Everybody got that? It's kind of just trying to bring a little fun to the proceedings. Yeah, I know. Thank you, Alexa. This difference has had a direct link to severe rain events, which used to be rare, but that New Yorkers have now become accustomed to. For each degree Celsius of warming, the air can hold approximately 7% more moisture, leading to increased precipitation and more severe rainfall events. Our current 2.6 Fahrenheit degree temperature increase equals 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. I figured that out all by myself when they presented me with the thing. I converted it. So, New York City stormwater and sewer infrastructure is struggling to keep up with today's very extreme weather. While the city's stormwater system is designed to process 1.75 inches of rainfall per hour in most parts of the system, and in some areas less than that. The rate of rainfall during storms has exceeded the capacity of the city's stormwater infrastructure in many areas on many occasions in only the last few years. Many New Yorkers are learning to live with the realities of regular flooding, including sewer backups, property damage, and threats to health and life. Helping our stormwater infrastructure adapt to the new climate reality has been a focus of my career. In 2008, the council passed my bill, which became Local Law 5 of 2008, directing the city to develop a sustainable stormwater management plan to reduce the volume of stormwater flowing into the sewer system. This law formed the basis for much of the stormwater reporting and planning the city does today. Thanks to the efforts of DEP and consent orders from the state and mandates like those imposed by laws like Local Law 5, the city has managed to reduce the volume of combined sewer overflows, commonly referred to as CSOs, which occur when heavy rainfall causes the city's combined sewer system to discharge sewage into the city's waterways. The city's CSO discharges have decreased by more than 40% since 2008. That's a huge number, and DEP is to be commended for that. This is tremendous progress. The importance of public infrastructure that can convey stormwater without polluting waterways will only grow as climate change continues to increase the intensity of rainfall in New York City. But CSOs that pollute our coastal waters are only part of the story. The new frontier is mitigating street flooding, sewer backups, and other manifestations of flooding in the city's terrestrial environment. DEP has taken extraordinary steps to reduce the impacts of flooding and to prepare for our new climate, including the Cloudburst Program, Rainfall Ready NYC, Rainproof NYC, among other efforts. DEP also undertakes rigorous planning for rain events and flash floodings. I applaud these efforts, and I look forward to hearing how we can work together to better prepare New York City's infrastructure for today's climate realities. In addition to hearing from the administration, the committee will hear the following legislation, including two bills that I authored. Intro 814 would require DEP to identify areas prone to sewer backups that regularly flood after rainfall events, update requirements for DEP's Sustainable Stormwater Management Plan, and conduct community outreach about stormwater management practices. Intro 815 would require the creation of an inland flood hazard area map, climate adaptation planning, and resilient construction for inland areas. Finally, proposed Reso 144A, sponsored by Councilmember Julie Menon, who could not be with us today. She called me and indicated that she regretted not being able to be here, calls upon the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation to remove restrictive barriers to uncapped funds New York City can receive for water infrastructure upgrades. I think she was put up to that by Rit. He probably suggested that to her or whatever. These pieces of legislation would help, would help New Yorkers prepare for a warmer, rainier future by paving the way for infrastructure improvements and safer construction designed for the world we live in today and will live in tomorrow, and not the world we left behind in 1970. I would like to thank the committee staff, Committee Counsel Claire McLaughlin, Policy Analyst Ricky Chawla and Andrew Bourne, Financial Analyst Tanvir Singh, and finally my Legislative Director Nabi Kaur for all their hard work. It's my privilege to recognize the following members who have joined us. Councilmember Mamarado, Holden, Aviles, and Zhuang. And with the first witnesses will be from the administration: Red Agarwal, Commissioner of DEP; Catherine Mallon, Chief Operating Officer; Tassos Georgelis, I hope, right? Deputy Commissioner of the Bureau, Deputy Commissioner of the Bureau of Water and Sewer Operations; and Angela Licata, my buddy, Deputy Commissioner for Sustainability. There you have it. I'll now turn it over to the Committee Counsel to give the affirmation to the witnesses. And then after that, the Commissioner can commence with his good testimony. That's in number 4 font. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Please raise your right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Okay. Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Okay.
Okay. Well, good morning, Chair Gennaro, and good morning, members of the committee. I'm Rid Agarwal, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and as the good chair pointed out, I'm joined by our Chief Operating Officer and our 2 Deputy Commissioners with direct oversight over stormwater management, and thank you for convening this hearing. In the interests of time and knowing, Mr. Chairman, that you've got a constraint, I will abridge my testimony, which we sent to you. We try to be complete, you know, hence the smaller font. I'm sorry about that. We'll get you a different version if you prefer. But let me begin and you know, start by saying, of course, as your remarks pointed out, Mr. Chairman, that we do not have to tell you that climate change is real and it is here. And as I point out on a number of occasions, in 2020, the U.S. National Climate Assessment reclassified New York City from a coastal temperate zone to the humid subtropical climate zone, a recognition that we now live in a place that our infrastructure was not designed for. We face several types of flooding impacts and risks as a result. Rising sea levels are creating more frequent tidal flooding, which we have seen particularly but not exclusively in the communities around Jamaica Bay. Rising sea levels are also causing groundwater levels to rise, which is exacerbated during heavy storms and periods of long-term rainfall. Of course, this means an increasing risk of coastal inundation. And I note, even though it's not our topic today, that multiple forecasters have indicated that this coming hurricane season is expected to be more severe than average. And so while today's hearing is primarily about stormwater, before I turn to that, I'd like to say a few words about coastal defenses. In the 12 years since Hurricane Sandy, New York City has pursued 2 complementary kinds of coastal flooding strategies. One is about preventing storm surges from causing flooding. This is what coastal defenses are. The reality is that these major projects, most prominently East Side Coastal Resilience, but not alone, are massive, complex projects that take years to design and years to build. We are making significant progress, and in fact, we expect the first gates of Esker to be turned over by the contractor later this year. Within 2 or 3 years, several of these projects will be complete, and many of New York City's neighborhoods will be protected against storm surges. As of now, more than a dozen projects are underway, but none of them is fully functional. The reality is that this year, if a storm surge hits New York City, there will be flooding. The good news is that in the same period, we have also invested huge amounts of money in resilience, which is not about preventing flooding, but about ensuring that we can withstand and bounce back from it. As we know, 44 New Yorkers lost their lives in Hurricane Sandy and thousands had property destroyed. But among the storm's major impacts was the long-term disruption it caused. Because so many buildings had their electrical equipment in basements, many were without power for weeks, and some, especially at NYCHA, were without elevators for months. We learned from this, and now, happily, our building-level resilience efforts are well advanced. Our power plants, our wastewater treatment facilities are better protected. Many buildings, especially at NYCHA, have relocated or hardened their critical equipment. While a flood today would still cause damage, in most cases it would be the kind of damage that disrupts lives for hours or a day or two, rather than for months. Overall, New York City will have invested more than $18 billion in coastal preparedness in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. Roughly speaking, somewhere between a quarter and a third of that is for building or site-specific resilience, and the remainder is for large-scale coastal infrastructure. Even with this, the work is far from complete, and the U.S. Army Corps HAT study will cost upwards of $50 billion. And we do not have a dedicated source of funding, either federal or local, for coastal resilience. I say this in part because of what we may face this summer, but also because the reality is that our stormwater resilience efforts really started in earnest only 2.5 years ago, after Hurricane Ida, whereas our coastal work began 12.5 years ago, after Sandy. As with coastal resilience, it will take us over a decade to see measurable progress in stormwater resilience infrastructure, and it will cost billions and billions of dollars. As with coastal resilience, building-level resilience will be much faster to achieve than infrastructure-level protection, and the reality is that we will need both. One key difference is that we expect to pay for most stormwater resilience projects with local funding sources. That is, of course, both good news and bad news. As New Yorkers, we will be less dependent on state or federal decisions to shape whether we achieve stormwater resilience. But the bad news is that the more resilience we want, the higher our bills will have to rise. I will skip over a couple of the next paragraphs because, in part, Mr. Chairman, you covered it, but I will call your attention to the data that we have on page 3 here, which is that, as you pointed out, our sewer system, while it was designed and the targets for it were set largely by borough presidents in the years prior to 1980 when DEP was formed, our target has been to design the sewer system to accommodate the quote-unquote 5-year storm. The reality is that in 2023, at various parts of the city, we had 5 storms that broached that 5-year limit of 1.75 inches per hour. Now, it may be that 2023 is an outlier even on the broad trend that we know is coming, and 2024 hasn't been quite that bad thus far, but it is an example of how our weather is changing, and I think that is how we see very directly the impact of this recategorization, recognizing that our weather is no longer what it once was. And I will note, and I'm down at the bottom of page 3 now, the request in Intro 815, which, and I'm pleased to note that we are finalizing yet another new flood map showing those locations where flooding is expected at the 5-year storm level, which is that 1.75 inches per hour. We have already published, as you know, the flood maps reflecting the 100-year storm, which is a truly extreme storm, and the 10-year storm, which we published last a year and a half ago, and we refer to as the rainfall ready map. It is worth noting that these are just models, and of course, all models are wrong. And one way that we check our maps is to talk to you and your colleagues as well as residents when we do walking tours. We've had good feedback, but it's important not to mistake models for infallible fact. We've had several unprecedented storms and can only expect to have more. Also, of course, in a city as big as New York, rainfall varies dramatically across the city. For example, on September 29, 2023, when North Brooklyn received 2.6 inches in the most intense hour of the storm, the second most intense rainfall ever recorded in New York City, other parts of the city received less than 1 inch per hour. So when I say that the city experienced 5-5-year storms in 2023, it doesn't mean that everywhere on the flood map flooded 5 times. But one thing is clear looking at these flood maps. Flood risk is a citywide problem. Manhattan, due to its elevations, its bedrock, and the sewer policies of Manhattan borough presidents past, tends to do well, but even Manhattan has flood-prone locations, especially in Upper Manhattan, where there were once streams and wetlands. I know that for each of you, your neighborhood's flood-prone locations seem like the worst anywhere, but we need to recognize that this is a citywide problem and think about citywide solutions. As I said, the fundamental challenge is that we have a stormwater management system that was designed for one climate and is now facing another. Our first step, and clearly the most cost-effective step, is maximizing the performance of our current system, and we have been doing that. We all know that sewers are the first line of defense against flooding, and catch basins are the way that stormwater enters our sewers. First, I know that you all know that catch basins can be blocked in two ways. We've talked about this at great length. They can get filled up with debris, in which case DEP has to come and scoop them out, or they can get matted over, in which case someone, which frankly could be anyone, simply needs to use a broom or a rake to clear away the leaves and litter that are blocking the drain. We are tackling both types of blockages. I'm very proud of the data-driven catch basin inspection program that DEP implemented, thanks to Deputy Commissioner Georgelis, which optimizes the cleaning of our more than 150,000 catch basins. Informed by past cleaning data, we target more frequent inspections in the areas that are more likely to need cleaning. We've also created a new fleet maintenance team to augment the work sanitation and parks do to maintain our vehicles. Given their design and the stresses they experience, catch basin cleaning trucks are inherently prone to breakdowns. Just last year, we hired our own small team of mechanics, and we are now better able to accelerate repairs to get our catch basin cleaning trucks back in service. Our new inspection schedule and our new maintenance team have allowed us to increase catch basin cleanings by 22% through the first 4 months of fiscal year 24, while overseeing a 45% decrease in the resolution time needed to clear a clogged catch basin. Today, I'm pleased to say we clean clogged catch basins within 3 days of identifying that cleaning is necessary, whether they are identified by a 311 call or by our own proactive inspections. To prevent matting over from completely blocking water from entering a catch basin, we have also begun installing a new catch basin design that includes a second grate on the sidewalk. This additional elevated grate allows the basin to function even if leaves cover over the main grate during a storm. We have also been doing more to clean out sewers than before. Over time, small debris and grease can build up on the inside of sewers, which reduces their capacity. In fiscal year 2023, we cleaned 692 miles of sewers. That is effectively 10% of the entire sewer network, employing Vector trucks and other cleaning methods to clear out that debris. Cleaning alone won't solve the capacity problem, but it can add a bit of capacity, and every little bit helps in a rainstorm. As I've discussed before, though sewers are the primary tool for managing stormwater, we rely on a suite of tools based on communities' needs. While we are doing this improved sewer work, we are also continuing to implement our green infrastructure program. As I mentioned last month, in 2023, we added nearly 1,000 new green infrastructure assets to our system, raising the total to 13,000. We are also making progress on cloudburst infrastructure, which designs public spaces to retain water during major storm events. I'm pleased that our first cloudburst project at the South Jamaica Houses of NYCHA will break ground this summer. We have another 4 that are in design and will enter construction over the next 2 years. We've also had great success with obtaining federal money for these. We have been selected and are awaiting award of $123 million for cloudburst projects already, and are applying for more money for additional neighborhoods, including East Elmhurst and Central Harlem. I will skip ahead a bit to page 6. As you know, and as we committed to in Plan YC, DEP has been working on a stormwater resilience strategy for the city for nearly 2 years now. Our first step was to ensure that our 2 stormwater planning organizations, BWSO's Capital Program Management Group, led by Wendy Sperduto, and BEPA's Capital Planning Group, led by Melissa Enoch, were staffed as fully as we could accommodate and were working together. Because green infrastructure in the past has been considered only as part of the city's long-term control plan for reducing combined sewer overflows, DEP had not traditionally considered a mix of gray and green infrastructure to address a given flooding issue. Now, with great collaboration, which I will point out is led by great female engineers and planners, and working together, we are tackling this challenge in the right way. Our second step was to assess how many locations are likely to require significant work to meet a basic level of future stormwater resilience. Over the past year, we completed a study to identify the areas in New York City most in need of stormwater flooding relief. This study looked at our flood maps and incorporated community complaint records and sewer system capacity. We identified more than 80 discrete locations that experience the most chronic and severe flooding during a storm that produces 2.1 inches of rain per hour. These areas represent 20% of the area in the city subject to street flooding during a storm. Our third step was to build tools that would make our planning work easier and more effective. Previously, New York City had not invested in a digital model of our entire sewer system. This meant that we could not fully model flooding scenarios. Deputy Commissioner Georgelis, Director Sperduto, and I all prioritized this work, and under Wendy's leadership, this digital model was completed earlier this year, enabling us to identify efficient and cost-effective solutions to capacity limits in a way that we have not been able to do before. The investment in this model is already paying off. We are now able to identify where interventions are needed to reduce specific areas of flooding. Identifying these opportunities is more complicated than one might think. Sometimes a corner floods because of an issue at that corner. That's easy to identify. Sometimes a corner floods because of an issue upstream or downstream of that corner in a location that we hadn't looked at before because it itself does not have any flooding. That's where this modeling system can help us identify the problem. We're also using this tool to identify areas where we can use existing capacity more efficiently by identifying ways to redirect flow and create new pathways to spread the volume. These innovations would use existing infrastructure to significantly increase sewer capacity and possibly avoid our needing to upsize miles of trunk sewers. We are early in this process, but I look forward to speaking to you all about its progress. Before I move on, I want to stress this. The kind of dramatic planning we will need to do to re-engineer our system for a new climate will not require just a bunch of projects, but will require us to invest in and maintain new tools that help us be much smarter about the work we need to do. As you ask us questions and seek to hold us accountable, I hope you think not only about the new things we build, but also about how we are managing and maintaining the tools we need to do the job, whether those are catch basin cleaning trucks or digital models for engineering. Our next step was to apply our model and our new integrated planning approach to a set of site-specific case studies around the city. The goal was to do some deep engineering assessments to see in depth what the needs were in each location, what the potential mix of solutions might be, and what an intervention might cost. We looked at 4 locations in depth: Dyker Heights, Casina Park, Knickerbocker Avenue, and the Jewel Streets area. I won't bore you with the details of each assessment, but a few lessons emerged. Where there is excess capacity in sewer mains, the most effective solution will be ensuring the sewers in neighborhoods that are large enough to convey the local flow to these larger trunk mains take advantage of that capacity. This was the key lesson of the Dyker Heights case study, where we plan to upsize the network of local sewer pipes that lead to significant downstream capacity. It's basically unblocking a bottleneck to achieve capacity that we had never needed before but can now still take advantage of. The second lesson is that gray and green infrastructure can be complementary. In the Jewel Streets neighborhood, which sits at the lowest elevation in the area, we are exploring the combination of a blue belt to capture and store stormwater alongside a larger pump station and trunk main capacity to effectively drain it. Here, the combination of gray and nature-based solutions allow each to provide part of the solution. Third, green infrastructure can be effective, faster, and cheaper in some situations, but it can be complex to implement and maintain. In Casina Park, one attractive alternative could replace some of the recreation space in the park with a blue belt. Jointly with the Parks Department, we will need to see whether this is a change that residents would support. Further, Green infrastructure tends to be more maintenance intensive than gray infrastructure. We will need to ensure that responsibilities are clear and that maintenance funding is available, or else green infrastructure investments will fail for lack of maintenance. Finally, in some situations, expanding gray infrastructure like trunk sewers can be the most efficient solution to drain large volumes of stormwater from flood-prone locations. Bushwick has an extensive array of rain gardens and other green infrastructure assets that were built to improve water quality of stormwater runoff. However, the Knickerbocker Avenue area still faces regular flooding during significant rainfall events. The best solution in this area is dramatically to increase the size of the sewer that runs down Knickerbocker Avenue. The task of designing and delivering major sewer and related infrastructure projects in the 80 or so locations we identified will take at least 30 years at our current funding levels of roughly $1 billion per year for stormwater-related infrastructure. And this is just to achieve a basic level of resilience, not at all to protect every New Yorker against all storms. Achieving protection from the kind of storm we experienced last September could cost upwards of $250 billion, a cost New Yorkers would need to bear in the absence of state or federal funding sources, and may not even be physically possible in some areas given limited space for larger sewers beneath our streets. This work also leads to 3 other conclusions that I hope this committee takes into consideration. The first is that, as a city, we will have to make decisions about the trade-off between more flood protection and greater costs. We will certainly do everything we can to maximize federal and state dollars. And I thank the committee for Resolution 144A to help us get our fair share of funding from the state. But the reality is that the vast majority of our stormwater resilience efforts will be paid for by New Yorkers. However much we want to be protected, our costs will rise accordingly. The second is that building-level protection is both faster and more cost-effective in many cases than neighborhood-wide infrastructure. The work New York City has done to make individual buildings more resilient to coastal inundation has moved much faster than our work to prevent coastal inundation. In the same way, building-level stormwater resilience will be faster and usually cheaper. Pursuant to Local Law 1 of 2023, we have been developing a plan for a backwater valve prevention program, or backwater valve program, and are on track to meet the requirements of this local law. We don't see this effort as a replacement for infrastructure, but as a complement. The city's infrastructure should expand to deal with our new weather patterns, but homeowners and building owners will also have to do more to protect their own property and create resilience. This may also mean using basements differently, just as was required in the coastal floodplain after Sandy, and as Intro 815 implies. It might mean doing more on-site to manage stormwater, like disconnecting roof runoff from sewer lines or removing impermeable surfaces or installing dry wells. How we accomplish this is still to be determined, but it is likely that the city will need to do more to provide technical assistance to property owners to make their properties more resilient. The final conclusion I ask you to think about is that this is not just a technocratic decision. DEP alone cannot deliver a stormwater resilience plan for the city. We will need a much broader conversation about how much we are willing to pay, how much flooding we are willing to accept, and what kinds of responsibilities we are willing to impose on homeowners. DEP is the right agency to offer alternatives, but these are fundamentally political questions. I very much appreciate the impulses behind the several bills being heard today, and I believe there is a path forward to crafting legislation based on both intros 814 and 815 that we would enthusiastically support. However, these are complex issues, and I hope the Council does not seek to legislate hastily. We support the idea behind Intro 814, which is to codify our ongoing stormwater resilience planning into law. However, many of the specifics in this bill are problematic and others miss the main need and instead mandate reports and disclosures that we think would distract our staff without creating real value. Given the update I have provided today, I hope this committee appreciates that we are taking stormwater resilience planning very seriously and that you will work with us to codify an approach that gets this right. This will require setting reasonable definitions of what the Council will require DEP to assess, reasonable timeframes for doing the work, and useful reporting requirements. I will point out that the identification of 5 flood-prone areas in each borough is highly arbitrary and doesn't reflect the reality of the city. With respect to Intro 815, we believe the maps that we have published are robust and informative, so the legislation need only require that they should be maintained and updated as necessary. If the council has specific concerns with those maps, I'd be very happy to discuss them. Further, I would point out that DEP, not MOCEJ, is the right agency to manage flood maps. The other item in 815 is the idea that building code changes may be necessary to address stormwater challenges. Given what I have said about the need for building level resilience, I completely agree with this idea. But we are highly concerned that the approach 815 takes to this is premature and may be counterproductive. As a result, we must oppose Intro 815 as it stands, but we are willing to work with the council to amend it if the council is willing to allow us enough time to do so. I would also like to use Intros 814 and 815 as an opportunity to streamline existing reporting requirements. MOCEJ in particular and DEP as well are subject to a long list of reporting requirements with inconsistent reporting dates, multiple reports on similar topics, and permanent reporting requirements that have long since outlived their usefulness. We are wasting scarce staff time in writing reports that no one needs, and we need to get out of that business so we can actually do the policy and engineering work to make progress. As I have noted, we continue to need help in getting our fair share of federal and state funding. So while the administration does not traditionally opine on council resolutions, I will say that Resolution 144A is consistent with the messages I am trying to convey and can only help the city's cause. Above all, we need the City Council to help us think about this difficult trade-off we will have to decide upon as a city. How much resilience are we willing to pay for, and how much inconvenience are we willing to impose on homeowners and building owners? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I certainly very much appreciate your comprehensive testimony and you and your staff's diligent efforts to move us forward in ways that really bring us to where we need to be in figuring out our understanding of the problem and how to address it. And I want to get my colleagues on to ask their questions. I always like to encourage their participation. I have my prepared questions. I'm just going to stroll through my notes that I made on your testimony, and then we're going to call upon my colleagues to ask their questions. Then I'll come back to ask my real questions, so to speak. On the first page of your testimony, the idea is to read my own writing here. Thank you for making the foray into coastal resiliency. That's critically important. And while we talk about flooding in the streets, we can't forget about storm surge and everything that is done to us and will do to us in the future, absent the kind of interventions that you're making here. Just like a broad question regarding coastal resiliency, the unit within DEP to do that that's established, up and running, and could you tell me a little bit about that?
Happy to. So our Bureau of Coastal Resilience, it certainly exists. It is a small but mighty team right now. We have our Deputy Commissioner who's been on board for about 6 months now, Lorian Farrell, who is phenomenal. We have staffed it with a couple of internal transfers.
Yep.
And in this year's executive budget, last year's for FY24, we've brought on a couple of field operations staff who are in training now to be ready to maintain the first floodgates at Esker, which will be turned over to DEP later.
So it's these folks that are interacting on the HAT study and all this other stuff.
Well, that we are building up. So there is still staff at MOCEJ who are working on that. EDC, of course, plays a very big role in terms of coastal resilience. And we do not have a full planning staff. We are working internally with OMB and others for how we staff that up over the coming months.
Right. And now, once upon a time, we had talked about legislation from the council in order to codify that. Is this something that's needed, or how do we do that? Like, what's your recommendation on how to proceed on that front?
I think that is certainly something that we should do collectively going forward.
Yep.
I think, for the first several months, I had asked Lorian to really think broadly about what she needed, and when Catherine joined at the beginning of the year as our new Chief Operating Officer, the two of them have been working very closely together. I think later this year, we could probably start that conversation from a position knowing what we need.
Let me just have a sidebar with council for a second. All right, I was just checking on the status. There is a bill that's been introduced. The council, you probably know that. I forgot. I knew it was something that we had discussed. But thank you for all of your considered efforts regarding pushing back against storm surge and the notes that I made. And on the second page of your testimony, I want to thank you for the $18 billion that has been invested in coastal preparedness since Sandy, and so that checked that box, and the projects that will come out of the HAT study. You indicate will cost upwards of $50 billion. We do not have a dedicated source of funding. I guess two questions: who is we, and in terms of source of funding, because isn't it supposed to be some kind of collaborative federal, state, city kind of thing? This whole thing. Why don't you shed some light on that?
Well, so the federal government, so there are a couple of components to this. The bulk of the 18 million, I think it's about 15 of the 18, is federal disaster relief funding. The federal government provides money after a disaster happens. It does not necessarily provide money before a disaster happens, right? And so one of the things, for example, and we've talked about, and I know Elijah Hutchinson has talked about before this committee, is we're using the Climate Strong Communities program to begin planning in some of the neighborhoods that were not actually hurt by Hurricane Sandy, but are equally at risk, right? Because every storm's a little bit different, but because of the way federal disaster money works, if you didn't get damaged during Sandy, you're ineligible for that money, right? Now there's the separate pot of money, which is what the Army Corps draws from, which is authorized by the Water Resources Defense Act, which occurs every 2 years in Congress. And that would be a separate appropriation. The HAT study has had, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, has had a fair bit of money appropriated for the study, but obviously it is too early for Congress to be appropriating construction money for it. But that comes out of the general, there is no formula money, the way there is for highways or for education or something. And the city's portion of that 18, roughly $3 billion, is city funding. That comes out of the city's general capital budget. It is city tax levy. Coastal resilience is ineligible for water utility money under current law.
Oh, could you run that by me again? Sorry.
Coastal resilience projects are ineligible for water utility money.
Oh, so the city has to come up with that through the regular capital budget, so to speak.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. And okay, thank you for that clarification. So you think I don't pay attention when you're speaking? I do. On page 5, in the middle of the page, there's a discussion of the $123 million for cloudburst projects. The DP is awaiting an award to do that. So the award would be from whom to do that?
So this, and actually I'll ask Deputy Commissioner Licata to chime in with the overall funding status of the cloudbursts, because some of that money is in the budget. But of course, whenever we see an opportunity, and this is something, as you know, the Adams administration and Deputy Mayor Joshi have been particularly aggressive at, is there is money from the bipartisan infrastructure law that we can apply for, and whenever we see a project, even if it's funded, that might be eligible for federal money, of course we're going to go for that.
Sure.
So Angela, can you talk about the overall funding status of the cloudburst projects, please?
Sure. So we are really pleased that we're making a lot of progress with federal dollars being dedicated for our cloudburst program. They seem to be competing very well for this type of funding, and so far we have received $73 million. The 123 includes some that are pending award letters that were sent to us, but we haven't necessarily received the funds yet. And the total that we'll be requesting, so in various forms of application at this point and or pending review, would be $439 million.
And the way this works, this is a competition type of thing for the funds, or it's not just like you make an application for it. Is it a competition, and they want to look at projects that have some innovation and seem to be better than others? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so certainly. We have looked at various federal opportunities, so various pots of money that are available with the federal government, but there are some common themes throughout, which include whether or not the project has a good cost-benefit ratio. So we want to make sure that the projects that we're designing would be able to be competently sufficient for the type of flooding in those areas, and we've scored very well on that point. We're also looking at social vulnerability indexes, and there's no surprise in New York City, we're scoring also very high in that regard as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate that. Yeah, here's where it gets sticky a little bit. Where are we? Page 8. It's about stormwater resilience needs to be the citywide effort. And in that paragraph, you indicated, Commissioner, that that what has been identified thus far would take 30 years at our current funding of $1 billion per year, and you intimate that that's not going to be satisfactory for anybody, and the process that needs to take place is, kind of a reckoning, so to speak, of what kind of protection we really want and need, the cities, the people of the city, what they're willing to abide in terms of water rate increases, the speed at which we want this done, and how do we, and that's all set in this milieu of a world that's, where the climate is changing, I guess the way to put this into a question is, what's the kind of process that you envision that you, us, the administration, the council, and the people would sort of come together to figure out how we make that assessment of how much protection we want, how much we're willing to spend? Do you have like a thought model on how that would happen? We hired you because you were smart, and so this is
Well,
this is the burden of being smart. So
try not to disappoint.
yeah, sorry.
Look, I think in a very real way, I think that's part of the thinking I would be very interested in doing with you and your colleagues as we think about what 814 and 815 could accomplish. I think there is a real role for legislating a path to stormwater resilience, particularly because, as I said, it is not something that DEP can do alone, because it is not just a technocratic question, right? We have begun this process called Rainproof NYC, which is a partnership between the city and Rebuild by Design. And that is a first step towards this. It's DEP and MOCEJ together are working with these outside organizations. It's an interesting approach that has empaneled a group of New Yorkers, some of whom are expert, some of whom are not, and intentionally not expert, but are concerned about flooding and climate change, to talk about what some of the solutions might be, to talk about some of the trade-offs that we might have to make. That's one step.
Right.
That does not solve the problem. We have not really felt ready to speak publicly about this until we got to the point that we are now in our assessment. And I will stress that number of 30 years at $1 billion a year is really a very high-level estimate. As you know, just yesterday, the MTA came out saying they need $6 billion for resilience for their system. There's another 22 locations the MTA has identified that are not on our list, where they want us to do work to keep water out of the subways. And so we are working with them very closely, but that is yet another need that we will have. So I don't have a clear path laid out.
Right.
I just think some of it is beginning to discuss the extent to which, number one, there's basically no scenario I can imagine in which we can tell every New Yorker, we're going to protect your home from all types of flooding. I just don't think that's a realistic future for us to aspire to. So we've got to reckon with the fact that there are a lot of basements that really need to be used differently than they have been. I think the other thing is that either we have to be ready to wait a long time, or we have to think very differently about the city's funding and delivery mechanisms, because money is not the only constraint. As you know, this administration has been working very hard and thus far not been successful in Albany in getting the state legislature to turn the Department of Design and Construction into an authority so it can do more. Virtually all of our stormwater resilience work, other than blue belts, and actually even most of the blue belts, is delivered by DDC, which means that if DDC cannot deliver the work, if they don't have the engineers, if they don't have the procurement folks, if they don't have the construction management staff, we could have all the money in the world and we still can't get the job done, right?
Right.
So there's a bunch of things that will happen.
Could you just tell me a little bit about what you're trying to get done in Albany with regard to turning DDC into an authority?
Well, so that is something I don't think we have any of our colleagues from DDC here, and I would...
Yeah, but you're aware of what's going on.
So for... certainly it was a highlight in the last session of the legislature, and we're making another effort this time, and it came out of the Joint Capital Process Reform Task Force that the mayor and the controller started back in 2022, was the recommendation to turn DDC into an authority akin to the school's construction authority. That would allow it to have the ability under law, for example, to utilize progressive design build, which is universally appreciated as a much faster way to deliver complex capital projects. That is something that the state law prohibits DDC in the city from currently doing. We have design build, but not progressive design build. Those are slightly different.
Right.
Rely on my colleagues if you want more on.
No, that's
exactly
fine.
how
I
they're
just
different.
need a high-level thing, yeah.
But that is a key thing that if DDC obtains this change in the law, they would be able to have, and DDC certainly has identified that as a key step towards unlocking their delivery capacity.
Thank you. I'll just make a little note to the staff of the committee to, get me a little more up to speed on all that and on this whole DDC issue and what constructive role the council can play. Not that Albany listens to us either, but certainly I want to be more knowledgeable about that. And obviously there are some, political hang-ups that people have about there's some kind of reason that people don't want to do that. And so I don't want to talk about that here, but I want to come to know what that is. And I know a lot of people in Albany too. So I want to find out about that. Thank you. And regarding, what, I'll get to 814 and 815 once I start my questioning in earnest. But now I've taken up a lot of time here. Is this in the right order? Is it the right order? Okay. Like I said, I'll come back for more questions, but now it's my pleasure to recognize Councilmember Holden for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I have a few different areas. I know you talked about catch basins being cleaned. Have you added more trucks? Because you said you added, you're up 22%, I guess, in cleaning. Yeah. Have we added a better fleet of equipment to do that?
Well, I'll invite Deputy Commissioner Georgelis to talk more about specifically what we've done. It's not just about adding more trucks. We've done, and under Tassos's leadership, we've done a better job of identifying what needs to be cleaned, of making sure that trucks are available. It is all of that that works together to get that.
And the second part, just in regard to that, do we have a map of locations that have been cleaned and when? This way we could be proactive and say, this area has had some flooding, maybe we should look at cleaning the catch basins in that area.
We certainly do that. Tassos, right. Why don't you talk about that?
Okay.
Thank you for the question, Chair Gennaro and the rest of the council members. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to testify today and share with you our stormwater planning. Catch basin trucks. So catch basin trucks are highly specialized. If you've ever seen them or if you haven't seen them up front, I welcome, you can come out and we can show you in our training center how to use it. It's basically a big claw machine in the back of a dump truck that we use to clean. With them being so specialized and the use that they get, because we put them out all day long and they work constantly, they break down often. In the budget and after Ida, we got money to, I think, buy 9 or 10 new trucks, and those are in the procurement cycle. So we're waiting for those to come in. I think over the next year they should come in, and that's going to help us bolster the fleet of trucks that we have.
So they break down often. You don't have enough of them, right? You need 9. You ordered 9 more, but
yeah.
I mean, given the problem that we're facing, that should be a priority to order a lot more than 9 for the entire city of New York, right?
So the 9 is in addition to the fleet that we have.
How many?
So
But how many do you
We're also
have?
looking to replace a lot of the fleet that we have. I don't have the specifics on the capital cycle for that. We can get that for you.
All right.
But we're looking to replace all of them, and we're also looking at how to get them up and running quicker. And I think Commissioner gave that in his testimony that we just started a smaller group of mechanics and stuff to get those trucks out quicker.
So we're trying to fix them, but they are complex. They break down, but we need more of them, and we need more than 9. So the investment, I think, in a new budget should be, let's get more, because we see, I mean, I've seen it in my district where we had flooding because of mainly, not only there's not, rain comes down very heavily, obviously, quicker than the catch basins can absorb it, but they're also sometimes not cleaned properly, or there's debris, there's litter in New York City. So, and, I did ask DEP, I said, do we clean catch basins? Do we have let's say we got advance notice of a storm coming in 4 or 5 days. Do you send more crews out working overtime to try to catch up to that? Cleaning.
So when the city's flash flood plan is activated, we have known locations that we have that flood, and with our partners at sanitation and DOT, we go out and it's close to 1,000 catch basins that we go out and they check. We have a portion of it with the partners. When the other city agencies go out and do their inspection, if they go out and make sure that they're not matted over, which is the condition that the commissioner explained before, which means when you get leaves and debris covering the top of the basin and renders it non-functional, they go ahead and clean that. When they find that if the basin can't take water or is clogged, then they call us and we send crews out immediately, get that cleaned before the storm comes.
Okay. Just on the map, if you could get to that later, we'll talk. I'm running out of time. I just have to get a couple of questions
so
in.
if you want, was we on the catch basin inspection cycle? So we've been looking at this differently over the last 7 or 8 years. And the biggest advancement we made in the inspection cycle is we were able to get tablets to the team of catch basin inspectors that we have, and they were able to capture data every time they inspected a basin. So with that information we got, instead of being on a 3-year cycle where we used to inspect the basins, we changed it to a data-driven approach to catch basin cleaning. So from there, we selected 15,000 basins that are the most prone to debris and clean them twice a year. And then we put the rest of the basins on an annual, biannual, or triennial cycle. And that's where we focus our resources on inspecting the basins that need to be cleaned. The inspectors come out.
Right.
What they do is they poke the basin, they see what the level of debris is, and if it reaches the criteria, we get the crews out to come and clean it. Now, we weren't as good as getting crews out fast enough to clean the basins, but we've reduced that over the last 2 years to, I think, 20% of what it was. And we're getting out there quicker and maintaining it. Now, preparing for a storm, you can't go out a day or two before the storm and clean all the basins. We have 150,000 basins. And that's what we're trying to do. It's an all-year process. And we're going out, and we're inspecting them, and we're cleaning. I think last year we've increased the cleanings to about 50,000 last year.
All right. Chair, if I may, just a follow-up on that.
Sure, I'll give the council member a little latitude.
I just want to bring up, we had talked to DEP about, because we get sewer backups, and when we tell our homeowners to file a complaint with the comptroller's office, most of the time they get denied when the sewer backs up. So it just doesn't seem to be a formula. Maybe it's the amount of rain that we get, where it's an act of God, and the city can't be responsible for that. I don't know the criteria. It's almost like this gray area. We get probably about 3 out of 4 are turned down, but the sewer backs up into people's basements. And we talked about check valve programs, education, discounts. Did we get anywhere with that program, or is there something on the horizon that we can talk about?
So, Councilmember, I'll say, so first of all, that's what I was discussing with Local Law 1, which is the backwater prevention valve.
Right.
And yes, so later this year, according to the timeline laid out in that law, we will put forward a proposal for a backwater program. We are still in the final stages of developing our recommendation for that. To your broader point, the reality is the majority of calls we get about sewer backups wind up being unconfirmed. There are lots of reasons that people can have what they think is a sewer backup. We have instances where it's really a clogged toilet and people call in a sewer backup. A lot of instances actually occur when the sewer line itself, which is still private property, is clogged. I mentioned in my testimony this issue of roof downspouts connected to sewer lines. That is something we are very much looking at. I increasingly am of the opinion that we need to take a major effort towards getting those disconnected across the city. First of all, in the separately sewered parts of the city, it is illegal to connect the roof downspout to the sewer line because the sewer line should only be carrying sanitary waste. In the combined sewer, it is legal, but what we are finding is we've had a number of instances where, frankly, we think people's plumbing is causing their own backup. We are not seeing any evidence of the sewer being full, but if you could just think about, you've got a whole roof worth of water in one of these cloudbursts, it's going into this relatively small sewer line. If that sewer line experiences too much pressure, the water will go this way as well as this way and go into your toilet. So we see homeowners who, not that it's their fault, but it's the design of their system where they are causing their own sewer backup. That is not something the controller should be paying out on. And I will hasten to point out, and it is under Tassos's leadership, we have traditionally, and what the city is responsible for, is when there is a dry weather sewer backup, that's usually caused because of the fatbergs, right? Grease from restaurants, the wet wipes that nobody should ever flush down the toilet, right, combine to create these sewer blockages. Thanks to work that Tassos and his team have done, we have reduced dry weather sewer backups in New York City by 70% over the last 10 years, a 70% reduction. That was the main focus for most of the last 10 years. And that was the majority of our sewer backups until a couple of years ago when this spate of wet weather started. Now wet weather sewer backups are the source of the majority of our sewer backups. It's a very different problem. It requires us to address different solutions.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Holden. I recognize Councilmember Aviles for questions.
Thank you, Chair, and I think good afternoon, maybe.
No.
Still morning. Good morning.
Still morning.
How are you? Thank you so much for your testimony, and I wholeheartedly agree that we need a larger font on the briefs. So thank you for that in advance.
I don't want to tell you how many billions that'll cost.
Everything costs $1 billion. It's the new number du jour. I'd like to talk a little bit about the comptroller's investigation into the preparedness. So on Monday, April 22nd, as we know, the New York City Comptroller published this report on the city's preparedness for and response to heavy rainfall caused by Tropical Storm Ophelia in New York City last September. According to the report, 2/3 of DEP's capital stormwater investments are over budget with an average budget overrun of 310%. Additionally, 3/5 of the projects were delayed with an average delay of 23.5 months. Can you tell us a little bit more about why so many of the projects have been late and over budget? And can you talk to us a little bit about what DEP can do to reduce these kinds of budget overruns and delays in their capital projects?
Thank you, Council Member. We are certainly still reviewing the Controller's report, which was not provided to us in advance, so we received it on Monday morning, just as the public did. From what we could tell, we actually very much disagree with the Controller's characterization of our budgeting and the delays. We're still working to figure out exactly what data was used, but there's a very big difference between a cost overrun, which is really something that happens after a project has undergone a reasonable amount of engineering to figure out what it's really going to cost, rather than the kind of placeholder numbers that we put in the out years of the capital plan, which are not really cost estimates. Mm-hmm. Right, and so if there is a number that is it is usually no more than a holding code, where we say, oh well, we're going to do this project and it'll cost this, and it's 4 years from now in the capital plan, that is not really a cost estimate. And the fact that those numbers go up reflects, number one, over the last 5 years, there's been significant increases in construction costs. That's true across the country and around the world, so that's not a DEP issue. And then in terms of delays, we have over the last several years dealt with the pandemic. We have dealt with massive constraints on our engineering staff, which we have now made great strides in building up. And so we are not where we would like to be, but we are getting there in terms of the engineers. You can't design projects if you don't have engineers on staff. As is well known, there have been a number of stretch exercises in our capital plan over the last couple of years. And so we've had lots of projects where we have had to move them later in the capital plan. And so, again, to call those cost overruns or delays implies, I think, quite inaccurately that our engineering team or our Bureau of Engineering, Design, and Construction or our colleagues at DDC are somehow not managing construction projects correctly. And I don't agree with that at all. I think our work in terms of delivering these capital projects is really, really high quality. And in general, they do a really good job of sticking to budget and sticking to timelines. It's a complicated city. One of the reasons, for example, that we want progressive design build is you can do a lot of design and then you open up the street and it looks completely different from what all the maps and records showed. And you've got to go back to the drawing board. That kind of thing happens on a regular basis, and that will cause a delay. That will cause an increase in cost. But in general, our capital construction teams do a good job. So I strongly disagree with the way the controller characterized that.
I appreciate that and certainly share the frustration around receiving a document the day of. The administration loves to give us documents the day of and then expect us to fully agree with it. So I appreciate that. In terms of, and we look forward to, as you dive deeper into that, and certainly in comparison to, say, NYCHA, DDC does an incredible job at moving through its capital projects. Chair, just one more. So many questions, so little time. Shifting over very quickly to Red Hook and the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project. I'm not going to go into very specific details around that, and certainly I think one contention from the community often in looking at this project, amongst others that have been happening in Red Hook, is the data that is being used. And in your testimony, it sounds like we're trying to model using new data, but I'm not sure if I understood fully that in fact the projects that are moving forward are using more current data as opposed to antiquated rainfall data. I'm sorry if that was a little convoluted. So maybe a clearer question is, are you using current rainfall data in these projects, or are we using the rainfall from back in the day?
So the exercise that I was describing in my testimony, and it wasn't arbitrary, but we basically chose a number of 2.1 inches per hour to do an assessment. You have to anchor somewhere. And I think going forward, as we think about what a stormwater resilience approach, per your question, Mr. Chairman, is, we want to look at a couple of different numbers. The New York City panel on climate change, which actually we're going to unveil their latest report later on today, projects a range, as all climate models will, so we're going to have to look at a bunch of different ones. That is a forward-looking number. It is still, like what we have tried to do is based on this idea that you design for the 5-year storm, right? Now, again, it's a political question, not a technical question, whether the 5-year storm is a good standard, because what that does mean is that every 5 years there's likely to be rainfall that floods, right, if you design to that. Now, specifically to the Red Hook project, and actually let me also point out, what I was describing is only about inland flooding. We have intentionally excluded the coastal, the flood zone, the coastal flood zone from this exercise. That will be something that the Bureau of Coastal Resilience picks up on. But the work I was describing is really 2 years worth of work. It started before BCR was even a thing. And the Red Hook project, and this relates to the funding, because it is a federally funded project, it has to conform with federal guidelines for that cost-benefit analysis. And one of the things that I hope we will be able to surmount going forward with the Bureau of Coastal Resilience, and ideally with a local source of funding, is not to be beholden to that. Because, and this is well understood through a lot of the public comment, including our own city's comment on the HAT study, is that the federal cost-benefit analysis does injustice to the city. And so an example of that with Red Hook is that the Esker project on the east side is designed for a 13-foot storm surge. The Red Hook project is designed for a 10-foot storm surge because that's all the cost-benefit analysis would allow. It's two sides of the same river.
Yeah, and apparently there's magical people who will pop up in the middle of a storm and pull out the barriers.
Well, now, in
because
fairness,
they're not
council member,
automatic.
you know, those, there is a reason to have things designed for manual operation, right? Because things that are fully mechanical are more likely to fail when you need them most.
Fair point.
And that is why we are building up the Bureau of Coastal Resilience, so we have a center of people who know what to do, who can redeploy. I mean, you know, when a water main breaks, Tassos has people, if it breaks in the middle of the night and there's already a water main break in that borough, he can get a crew from a different borough to come across, right, and fix it. So that when you have people doing the work and you are trained and you have those operational protocols, you can deal with that. So I actually tend to think that's the right design approach.
A fair point. Thank you so much, Commissioner, and I look forward to you coming to Red Hook so we can do some more walkthroughs in lieu of bureaucratic useless forms. This is your invitation. Community would love to walk through with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I recognize Councilmember Zhuang for questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for all the explanation. Finally, I get DEP 101, and I think I almost graduate from 101. And I have a very simple question. This data for those map, the data is by people reporting or you guys doing research? The flooding?
I'm sorry, is that that's our...
The stormwater flooding map.
Okay, so that is, and actually, Tassos, maybe you could talk about that. That is a model. But as I said in my testimony, we seek to refine and calibrate the model based on data that we receive. Could you say more about that, please? Oh.
Yeah, so we took an opportunity to use a state-of-the-art model, which is a two-dimensional model. So what's unique about a two-dimensional model is it allows us to see the flooding area, the geographic extent, physical extent of the area, and also to see the depth of the flooding. And that is what we predicted utilizing those maps. And the commissioner mentioned we did that for a 10-year storm, a 100-year storm, and soon we'll be publishing on our website the 5-year storm.
This is by 311 phone calls or just by, how do you collect this data?
We use hydrological information. So we use data associated with the rainfall events, and then it's laid over the topography of the city to give us that information. And then we do check the 311 data and any other known data from our colleagues in the department about known and suspected flooding areas.
Okay, thank you so much. And also I want to thank Commissioner to bring everything to our community. And the other thing I want to mention, after my kids see how they dig out the garbage, and I think it should have some, maybe you guys work with the DOE, see if we can do some demonstration for some schools, what DEP about, what we can do, and some education program. That will be very helpful for the young kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. We do have a program, and I can get you more. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, where we do work in schools.
Okay, thank you. We'll follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm pleased to recognize Councilmember Salamanca for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Commissioners, and good morning to your team. Commissioner, I want to start off by very briefly talk about the borough commissioners. I know we've had many conversations on this. Just want to give you a context as to how this idea came about. When Hurricane Ida hit a few years back, I saw the devastation in the borough of the Bronx, just like I think we saw it in the city of New York. Many cars got flooded in. Many apartments, basements were flooded in. I think there were some fatalities, it's my understanding, in basement apartments. And, you know, it hit home. My wife's car got flooded in, and so did my stepson's car on the highway. And so, you know, the idea of who do we call to hold someone accountable in our borough, you know, even though and I have to give a big shout out to Effie, because Effie is always responsible, always she responds back, she picks up our calls and gives us real-time information whenever there's a water main break, regardless of the time. But, you know, Effie's not the one that we wanted to hold responsible. We wanted to ensure that we held someone responsible. And so the idea of borough-based commissioners came about. And I know that there was resistance from DEP, but we got the law passed 2.5 years ago. Can you please give me a status as to where we at with borough-based commissioners, DEP commissioners for every borough?
Yes, council member, and as you say, as you and I have discussed, we started in earnest. So let me actually say, I think one of the challenges that led to DEP's concern about this legislation is that, unlike the Parks Department, unlike the Department of Transportation, we are not across the board organized by borough, right? So Tassos in the Bureau of Water and Sewer Operations, he has borough managers, and he has yards in each borough. But across the whole agency, we do not have operations that are divided that way. So it took us some time to think about how would we follow the spirit of the law, figure out what would be helpful to you, organize ourselves, and think about the roles and responsibility of these. That is something that I did in earnest, we did in earnest. My Deputy Commissioner for Public Affairs, Beth DeFalco, who's here, she will be leading that. We started recruiting. Those jobs posted, I believe, towards the end of last year. Unfortunately, those were among the roles that got held up in last fall's hiring freezes and other things. I'm pleased to say that we have interviews that have concluded. I expect that we will be able to make appointments before too long.
It's 2.5 years, Commissioner, when this bill was passed. And, you know, I understand that you're pointing at the pegs, but I know from the very beginning, and this predates you, that your agency just did not want to pass that bill. There was resistance from the very beginning, and we got it done. And every time I see you or your team, I remind them, where are my borough commissioners? You know, DEP plays a vital role in the city of New York, believe it or not, right? You're in charge of our waste, our sewage, our water supplies. Whenever there's a water main break, you know, we call you. When there's new development, right, and there's infrastructure that needs to be created, we reach out to you. Our catch basements, when they're dirty, you know, who do we contact? That's the importance of having a borough commissioner, so that we as elected officials and community boards can hold them accountable. And I just feel that this agency is just, you know, working on a snail pace because you just do not believe in that law. Let me ask you, there's a lot of development that's happening throughout the city of New York. Housing is our #1 priority here, building affordable housing. And we are focusing in areas that have not done their fair share. Communities that have low density, that have to do their fair share in terms of housing. One of the resistance that I'm hearing from these low density communities is that the infrastructure cannot handle affordable housing that's coming in to their communities. How is DEP working with the Department of HPD on monitoring affordable housing that's being built throughout the city, especially in low-density areas, so that we can push back on the NIMBYism that we can't build housing because my sewage system is not going to be able to handle what's being built?
Thank you, and I'll ask either Catherine or Tassos to chime in a moment more on the actual process. So let me start by saying there are kind of 3 flavors that we have to think about when it comes to the way housing impacts sewer capacity. The first is when you do relatively small amounts of housing across large areas. And so the administration's current City of Yes proposals, particularly those around accessory dwelling units, we do not believe those pose any meaningful issues in terms of sewage. 2/3 of the city is a combined sewer system. The increment of a little bit of housing, 1 ADU on a block or 2 or 3 ADUs on a block, is not going to change how the sewer system functions. And so we have no issues with that kind of dispersed increase in housing. And that's why, as I testified during our budget hearing last month, I am a strong proponent of the city's City of Yes proposal. There's at the other extreme is where we do significant upzonings of an entire neighborhood, right? And those, we are working closely with our colleagues, particularly at the Department of City Planning, to ensure that city planning is proposing those in a way that works with either works with existing sewer capacity, or where we are jointly ensuring that DEP has the capital money and the ability to deliver the increased sewer capacity that a sizable, targeted increase in density would create. You think about what's happened in Williamsburg over the last 20 years. You think about some of the other places where you would have thousands and thousands of units concentrated in a small area. That is something that could require significant investment. Councilmember Marmorato and I were just talking about the potential for that around some of the Metro North work in her district, and we are engaged in thinking about that. In the middle is when you have a new building, right? And whether it's affordable housing or any other kind of housing, it goes through the same process that the Bureau of Water and Sewer Operations undertakes to make sure that incremental demands of, whether it's a dozen new apartments or 200 new apartments on a given block will not overtax the sewer and cause problems. And maybe Tassos or Catherine, do you want to talk about that?
So as the commissioner was saying, is when an individual building is coming and they're asking to put something back that's much larger than what was there first, we have to do a hydraulic analysis. And that's going to tell us if the local sewer in front of the building is capable of taking that extra flow. And not just in that block, we also have to look at the neighborhood, because it could cause a problem for somebody down the line. And that's what we look at. When we identify that those are constraints, we have to look at how does our capital program match with that upgrade, right? And sometimes it doesn't line up with the same timeline as the development wants. The developers sometimes would go ahead and replace the sewer on that block on their own just to move things quicker. And that's the way the localized single buildings are done. When we're looking at a broader picture, that's when we look at not just the sewers in the streets, but when the large trunk sewers are under capacity, and that's when we got to look at it. And that's when we need to have a much larger conversation about a capital program.
All right. My last, Mr. Chair, if I just can ask just my last question. I'm
Sure.
reading here your testimony and your report on the coastal resiliency project status. I'm seeing that you're covering many boroughs, but I don't see the Bronx on this list. Can you tell me? I do know that the Bronx, we are, in terms of coastal resilience, you have Hunts Point, you have Councilmember Marmorato's district. Whenever it rains, it floods, right? Your parks flood, the Pelham Bay area and other areas in her district. Can you speak a little bit about any coastal resiliency projects that you have in the borough of the Bronx?
Well, Councilmember, one of the things, as I mentioned, is that unfortunately, because of the way federal funding works, virtually all of the city's current ongoing coastal resilience projects are only in places that flooded during Hurricane Sandy. And simply because of the way the tides and the winds were that night 12, 13 years ago, the Bronx was not as hard hit as much of the rest of the city. That does not mean the Bronx is not vulnerable, and that is one of the reasons that we've started the Climate Strong Communities program, and I'd have to get back to you, although maybe that was Tally. Oh, Paul. Actually, council member, I think we'd have to swear in. I'd ask Paul Lozito, our Deputy Executive Director from the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, because I don't have the Climate Strong Community neighborhoods off the top of my head. But that is exactly what Climate Strong Communities was set up to do, is address the gaps so that the city is proactively planning against risk as opposed to simply reactively planning for those places that were hit during Hurricane Sandy. And I would just reemphasize before I turn it over to Paul, and I guess you'll have to swear him in, is that, you know, when it, as you said about Councilmember Marmorato's district, if it's raining and you get flooding, that's not a coastal flooding issue, right? What we talk about with coastal defense is about that storm surge that flooded lower Manhattan, that affected the Far Rockaways, that affected Staten Island during Hurricane Sandy. That's different from rainfall, which was not the primary source of damage.
That's clear. That's clear, Commissioner. Know the difference, but it's my understanding when Sandy hit, for example, in the Hunts Point area, where New York City's food supply comes from, right? All the markets are there. I was a district manager at the time, and I read a report that they said we were quote unquote lucky when the storm hit. It was low tide. Should it have been high tide, our food supplies would have been flooded. So just curious to know, what protections are you providing for our food supplies in the Hunts Point market areas when it comes to coastal flooding?
But council member, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make, which is that because of the way the tides and the winds were that night, most of the Bronx dodged the bullet, right? Unfortunately, because federal funds are only available to deal with places after they have been damaged, that meant that those equally vulnerable locations in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan and parts of northern Queens were ineligible for federally funded coastal resilience. The city has had to start that on our own. That is something that this administration has started proactively, first with Climate Strong Communities, and it will be taken up by the Bureau of Coastal.
Commissioner, Sandy hit like in what, 2012, right? And we are in 2024. And I know that you have employees here. I always say this. There's something called permanent government, where you have employees that have been here for years that have been working on these plans. You mean to tell me that your agency prior to you have not put a plan together for resiliency, coastal resiliency in the borough of the Bronx? Because when Sandy hit, it was low tide, and therefore we don't qualify for federal funds, but there's no plan for the borough of the Bronx?
Councilmember, yes, that was the decision.
Councilmember, we kind of are where we are, and I think what the commissioner would like to do is bring on the person from MOCEJ, because this administration, going back in time, I don't think helps anything. But to give the floor to the person from MOCEJ who can talk about the steps that this administration is taking to get to the point that you want to get to, I think is the logical next step.
You're right, Mr. Chairman. All I want is I want a fair share throughout all boroughs, and I just feel like the Bronx is just a forgotten borough.
Plus, he looks like a nice guy. I want to hear from him. Yeah, so.
And I am from the Bronx.
And he's from the Bronx.
So, from the Grand Concourse. Sure.
Can you please state your name for the record?
Paul Onyx Lozito.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions?
I do. Thank you. Thank you,
And right before you start, I just want to recognize that we've been joined by Councilmember Nurse. Always a pleasure to have her, and look forward to your good statement.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm here to talk specifically about Climate Strong Communities, and Climate Strong Communities was designed to recognize the multivariate risks in neighborhoods: extreme heat, extreme rainfall, tidal flooding, and coastal flooding. And we recognize through this program that it is different by neighborhood, and there are multivariate risks by neighborhood, and that we need to do planning by neighborhood. And so we've done a review of issues across the city and neighborhoods that we need to focus on. We've currently selected Soundview as one of the target neighborhoods that are high risk. We're working hand in glove with residents in Soundview. We've had 3 public meetings to identify risks throughout the community. The first and foremost, what we do in those meetings is identify just general repair issues in the neighborhood. What we do after that is work with our city partners led by DEP to resolve those immediate repair risks, and then we work with the community to figure out what the unique issues are on the ground that could be resolved to address the localized hazards, whether it be the extreme heat through a coal corridors or a coastal risk or a rain-related risk. So we're in the process of doing that with Soundview. The goal is to identify and design projects that then we pursue federal resources for that community. We're in the process of identifying our round 2 neighborhoods where, there are neighborhoods in the Bronx that are high on the list.
All right. I know my time is up, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I would love to connect with you. My office would love to connect with you so I can learn more about round 2 and to see how, we can ensure that there's equity in the borough of the Bronx. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That would be great. I think that's the best outcome here. Councilmember, and you, getting together with MOCEJ and working with your colleagues, to fashion a vision for the future of the Bronx, regarding resiliency that meets your constituents' needs. So I think it's great that you're going to get together with him and MOCEJ. And don't forget, at the end of the day, we got Rit, who is he's a DP commissioner. He's the city's chief climate officer, and by virtue of coastal resiliency being a part of his orbit now, he's like the top of the pyramid of all of it. So you can always go and bother him too. If the administration lets you talk to him with the rules and everything now, and I said that in front of Alfonso. I shouldn't have said that. And so, anyway, so thank you, Councilmember, for your great contribution to this hearing. And we're recognized. I've already recognized Councilmember. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got 2 lists of people that I have to call for question. It is now my pleasure to recognize Councilmember Marmorato for questions.
Thank you, Chair. All right, I was going to talk about catch basins, but that has just changed after Councilmember Salamanca's conversation with you. I don't understand how you can say that we dodged a bullet in my district with Hurricane Sandy. I was there. I've witnessed it. I witnessed destruction. Maybe it wasn't so much waterfront, but this was one of the reasons why I wanted to join this committee, because we are struggling and we are suffering, whether it's sewer systems, whether it's waterfront. We are dealing with, you talk about this 5, 10, and 100-year storm. This is almost every storm in my district. We are constantly facing flooding. I'd love to invite you to my mother's house the next time it rains. And she has a sub pump that pumps a lot of the water out of her house. And her basement's constantly flooding. Her backyard is constantly flooding. We have people in Edgewater Park who have to they're on the waterfront every storm. Whether I'm not sure about how the tides work, but they are still getting the water. They're taking it on. Locust Point constantly flooding. And how can we not forget City Island? The last storm we just had, they were underwater. Something's got to change. You have to come up to my district. We have to do a walkthrough. We have to see how we can make this better. My people are suffering, and with all this additional building and rezoning that's coming to our community, we need something to change, because now it's happening in Morris Park, and they're inland. So whether it's their sewer systems, even along Eastchester Road, 25 years it flooded on Eastchester Road under the train trestle. Now all of a sudden you want to rezone and build all this housing in my neighborhood. It finally gets fixed, the sewer line. Why did it take 25 years to happen?
Councilmember, look, I'm really sorry. I can't take responsibility for 25 years of decision-making.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, in Hurricane Sandy, my point is that, as I have said over and over again, federal funding is flawed because it only allows money to be invested after someplace has experienced the damage. That is why the map of the projects that we are now doing is the way it is, because under previous administrations, we allowed federal funding availability to determine where we would do work. That is what we are trying to get ahead of and change in this administration. As you well know, I don't have to tell you this, we do not have a lot of city capital money to throw around, which is why, as Paul just explained, we started Climate Strong Communities as a way both to get ahead of coastal risk among the multi-hazard risk, as Paul described, and to prepare projects to apply for federal and state money, right? So we are doing what we can right now, and we are, as I think my testimony demonstrated, we are taking stormwater flooding extraordinarily seriously within this administration, within this agency. However, as I pointed out at the outset of my testimony, unfortunately, changing infrastructure is a long-term process. We are not going to have a plan in 6 months.
Okay, so how can my discretionary or capital funding help my community? Like, what is it that we can put the funding towards?
Well, look, we would be very happy to work with you, as we've already engaged in a couple of conversations with some of your colleagues on how member discretion money could be put to use. We've had some discussions around these new catch basin designs that could receive investment. There are a couple of other ideas that we've had. One of your colleagues is talking about getting a pump truck to deal with it's not the long-term solution, we recognize that, but to deal with an intersection that frequently floods, so we'd be very happy to engage with you. And council member, I will point out, we have been working to schedule the visit. As per the hearing a month ago, I was with council member Zhuang earlier in the week. These things take a little time to schedule, but it is not for a lack of willingness.
Okay, and I would like to also acknowledge that Effie is amazing. She's very responsive. She's very helpful. And Herschel, I met him the other day. He was awesome. He gave me a quick little education on catch basins. He was across the street from my office, so I did appreciate that.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to recognize Councilmember Nurse for questions. Very happy.
Thanks, Chair. Happy to be here. Happy Friday, everyone. Apologies for being late, but I was listening in on the train. As I always say, DEP, one of our favorite agencies, very collaborative, very responsive. But as you know, we've talked about flooding quite a bit in my neighborhood of Bushwick, and we do have some issues in Cypress Hills, so I appreciate the legislation brought forth by the chair and the work that you all have done to do, like, pilot out some different things. I think I say this all the time when I come to these hearings, this particular hearing. However, you know, we're still waiting to hear what kind of solution, if anything, will be brought forth for the community. And you know, I just want to put for the record, you know, I understand that someone like myself, a progressive, is not a friend necessarily or a favorite of the administration. But what I would ask is that my community not be punished for the other disagreements that I have with the administration. Where we do agree is where the infrastructure is to support our communities for the long haul. And I see that clearly with the work you're allowed to move forward very aggressively. And I appreciate that, but you know, we still should not punish certain neighborhoods because of politics. So I would really hope that, and I'm asking, that you could please support our community in dealing with the flooding that you have been engaged with for the last 2.5 years.
Councilmember, thank you. And let me assure you, of course, there is nothing that I have seen that suggests that politics plays a role in the way we do our capital planning. As is highlighted in my testimony, your neighborhood, and particularly the issues around Knickerbocker Avenue, are one of the areas we have studied in depth as one of the case studies for the work that I described. and we are working to turn the findings from that into a capital project. I just don't have particular news, but it is certainly not forgotten, and we are working on it very seriously.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure, and let me also affirm that, to the extent that the phenomenon that you describe ever, rears its head, you can always come to me, but I know that's not the way that DEP works, but always, okay, they are. So now it's back to me. Okay. And now, in your statement, you talked a little bit about intros 814 and 815, the way to make them as helpful as they can be in codifying what reasonably needs to be codified, and also we're open to suggestions about reports that bog down MOCEJ or whomever, when that work could be going towards plotting the future and not talking about the past. And so other than what you put down here regarding 814 and 815, what do you envision as a process to move forward collaboratively on these bills to get to something that we all can be happy about?
Well, I mean, look, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would very much like to see us get to a place where we can get legislation done relatively quickly, right? I don't think this is something that should require 6 or 9 months. I think this is something we can do over the next month or two if we work intensively together. What I would like to see is something where we are thinking about the work that we've described, particularly with Catherine arriving as Chief Operating Officer at the beginning of this year. She's spent a lot of time thinking around how do we get to the kind of stormwater resilience plan that we need. What are some of the steps that would go along the way? And I'd love to sit down with you and your team and the committee staff to talk about how we could put milestones together so that DEP is reporting out at the right points when we know enough to make it worthwhile, while holding us accountable that can't take forever, right? So I think that's one thing. On the idea of the building code, I am, as my testimony indicated, I am really enthusiastic about the overall idea about thinking how the building code can work with stormwater. I think that is an area where we are pretty nascent in our thinking, and so there may be a need to do some studying before we actually mandate changes in the code itself.
Right. That could be in the bill.
It could be in the bill.
Right, yeah.
100%. I'm not saying we have to wait. That's why I think there's a path forward. If we do some real work together, give it 8 weeks, 10 weeks, we could probably get somewhere pretty quickly. I like to think I have a bias towards action, so I don't think we have to study this forever.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things, we have our, we meet as a conference, and a lot of stuff comes up, and I mean, I have my own thoughts, but then I have all of my, colleagues that I'm having flooding, I'm having this, I'm having that, we have to plan, and there's this, belief that us codifying something like really makes it like almost all better. We can, we can hold it up and say this is it, and this is like the roadmap, and this is whatever, and that's and that can be true, and bills can either be very prescriptive, or they can set forth a a path, a process, or whatever, so that way we still have the thing that we did it and that we're pushing, and we're making sure that, you know what I'm trying to say here. And so it's important for me and for this council and for the people that we represent, you know, for everyone to understand that the council is doing all it can to get, you know, maximum progress and accountability on things that matter to the people that we represent, which, you know, you all very much want to have happen. And so that's where we find ourselves, because all of my colleagues are going to civic meetings. And they're all, you know, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do? And I'm not saying we do something just so we have something to say. You know, we do something that really, you know, creates a significant value added to get us to the place where we really want to go. I'm like talking like in poetry now almost. This is like, you know, I was supposed to be funny, Angela. That was like, anyway. So that's where we are in. So the summer is you know, kind of a relaxed time at the council. It gives us the ability to, I mean, legislatively relax, but we're all working like anything anyway. So let us endeavor to do that. I appreciate your good comments here on 814 and 815. And let me see, I have some other kind of, yeah, okay. I'm tempted just to read this whole thing and just have you react to it. Because one of the things I get is even in my part of Queens, I talk about things where there are you know, people from Southeast Queens who would be in attendance, and they're always asking me what's going on. And let me just read this, and we'll just kind of go from there. The 2022 annual report required by Local Law 56 of 2017 states that the city completed a pilot project to convey 30,000 gallons of groundwater daily into the storm sewer system at 166th Street and Foch Boulevard in Southeast Queens. And so this is some kind of like pilot project. What did the city learn from this project? Did reports of basement flooding and other types of flooding caused by high groundwater levels decrease in that area on 166th Street and Foch Boulevard after, you know, DEP completed this pilot? And so that is, I think, like the starting point for like a larger discussion about how to attack the flooding problems in Southeast Queens that are tied to, you know, the shutdown of the former Southeast Queens, you know, drinking water supply wells and their lack of completed, a fully built out, you know, stormwater system. And I know that DP has entered into some kind of arrangement with the, you know, USGS to monitor groundwater levels in Southeast Queens. So you get where I'm going. So this is all about, you know, the Southeast Queens situation on the micro, going from that one intersection to like the larger reality that we're trying to deal with. So that'll be my kind of open-ended question.
Well, I'll say a couple of things, and then I'll ask Tassos to talk specifically about that that project and its outcome. You know,
hang on, just one moment. The council wants to talk to you. All right, thank you. Please.
You know, the groundwater issue is actually a citywide issue. It is not just a Southeast Queens issue. It is, in fact, a nationwide and global issue because, as has been reported a fair bit in the New York Times over the last few months, rising sea level is raising groundwater tables along the coasts, certainly on the east coast of the United States, up and down the coast, and elsewhere around the world. And, of course, heavy rain will also temporarily raise groundwater levels. So while Southeast Queens, a number of people in Southeast Queens have been talking about this issue for many years, it is not just a Southeast Queens issue, and that is why we, as a citywide agency, have taken a citywide approach to this. The USGS project, which we just registered, I believe, last month, will allow us to get a baseline, so it will allow us to monitor groundwater levels across the city in a systematic way. Right now, we really only have anecdotal information based on 311 calls. That is not sufficient to shape any of the potential policy solutions that we might undertake. In Southeast Queens specifically, you know, as you just said, part of Southeast Queens does not have stormwater. We have $2.6 billion in the budget to build out stormwater infrastructure in Southeast Queens. I should point out, in the context of what I was just talking about, I said it would take 30 years at our current budgeting of $1 billion a year. Fully a quarter of all of the money dedicated to sewers in our capital plan is dedicated to building out sewers in Southeast Queens. 25% for that one part of the city. So while we hear a lot that that part of the city feels like it is forgotten, it is frankly the other way around. It is disproportionately receiving investment. It's necessary. It's a good investment, but we are heavily investing in Southeast Queens. Among the things that has been proposed by a number of residents and others in that area was restarting the old Jamaica water supply pump stations. One of the things we've done over the last 6 months is we've evaluated that, and unfortunately it turns out that that is probably a $1 billion cost. Those pumps have not been in operation for nearly 30 years. To restart them would basically be to rebuild them. And groundwater is not clean, as you yourself very much know from your time at DEC. We would need to treat it. And right now,
because the thinking would be to restart them and then pump them to waste. Is that what you're saying?
basically,
Right.
and so some in the community have proposed, and we've been trying to be open-minded. We've been trying to take these ideas seriously, or we have taken these ideas seriously. We've evaluated them. But although it sounds like an easy solution, it is not actually an easy solution, right? That groundwater is not clean water. We can't just dump it into the ocean. We'd need to treat it. The Jamaica treatment plant does not have the capacity. Recognizing that there are no easy fixes to this, one of the things we then realized we had to do was really get a handle on who is affected. And right now, and so about 2 months ago, we reached out to the borough president's office to start getting data on who is actually suffering from groundwater, because as I said, it may well be that it's a small enough number of buildings that it is better done through pumping out a given basement, right? All over the world, buildings, particularly those with low basements or particularly those in areas of high groundwater tables, pump their basements on an ongoing basis. That's just part of what maintaining the property requires, and that may be a reality that we face here, but we are committed to getting the facts and to understanding what might make sense. But Tassos, could you talk particularly about that intersection on the pilot there, please?
Sure. So the first part of the question was what has the city learned from this pilot project? The city's learned construction methods and designs to effectively collect and move groundwater. Also, as installed, it was a relatively small localized system, and it didn't have, it had very little effect on lowering the groundwater table. The second part was, did reports of basement flooding and other types of flooding caused by high groundwater levels decrease in the area of 166th and Foch Boulevard since we completed the pilot? We received no reports of groundwater flooding abatement in the area of the installation. Does the DEP intend to conduct similar pilots in other parts of the Southeast Queens? We're currently evaluating options for additional pilots. is there anything else?
No, that was good. I asked a question, you gave the answer, and so we went from so I got the macro and the micro, and so I am satisfied. And
Sure.
So just one point, because part of the question was about the plan to reduce incidental sewer backups in Southeast Queens, right? So I became Director of Operations back in 2009, and we spent a lot of focus on reducing sewer backups. Back in 2010, we had 1,775 confirmed sewer backups in Southeast Queens. In fiscal year 23, we only had 302 confirmed sewer backups. That's a reduction of 83%, right? And Rick mentioned earlier that we reduced backups 70% across the city. This part of the city that was suffering from SBUs are down 83% over the.
And also, rainfall and everything else was different from when you started, so it's not even like a level playing field. So those numbers are even, more striking when you look at it through that prism. And on that high note, I want to thank the administration for their good testimony and for giving us the benefit of your views and your passion about the issues that we all care about. And I wouldn't want your job for the world, please, but I don't see anybody rushing to give it to me. So really appreciate you being with us here today. We're going to move to public testimony in a moment, but not before I come over and say hi, and then we'll move to the next part of the hearing.
Thank you.
I can start now, okay. Okay, we're starting back up again. We're all online, right, Sergeant? We're good to go? I should just read. Okay, before we start up with the public part of the testimony, there's this document I've been given by the council to kind of set some ground rules. Now we're going to open the hearing for public testimony. I remind the members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall, who are not testifying shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant-at-Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant-at-Arms. People have done that, and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's hearing topics. Flooding and stormwater infrastructure, intro 815, 814, 815, and Reso 144. I ask people to keep their testimony to those topics. Testimony on other topics will be out of order and off topic. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant-at-Arms. You may also email written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. That is testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. And with that, I call the first witness, and the first witness, Joe Sharap, it looks like, and representing Greenwood Cemetery. Joe Sharap.
Good afternoon, Chair Gennaro. My name is Joseph Cherep, and I am the Vice President of Horticulture at the Greenwood Cemetery, a National Historic Landmark and 478-acre green space in the heart of Brooklyn. Storms before and many since Hurricane Ida have made tragically clear how easily overwhelmed New York City's sewer infrastructure becomes with heavy rainfall. Without upgrades, more untreated wastewater will be discharged annually into waterways and flood our city with water runoff that carries waste and pollution with it, putting our health and homes at risk. As we know, the communities that are burdened with decades of disinvestment are the most vulnerable to these risks. We at Greenwood applaud the 3 local laws on the docket today, especially requiring the city to create a map of the areas most vulnerable to stormwater flooding. The public sector must take the lead in protecting these communities, but private institutions must play a role, especially those in at-risk neighborhoods. I'd like to briefly share a stormwater project we have implemented thanks to the generous and sustained support from New York City EFC's Green Innovation Grant Program and NYC DEP's Resilient NYC Partners Program. This past fall, we broke ground on a comprehensive system that will manage about 51 million gallons of stormwater runoff annually, diverting it from entering the Owl Heads sewer shed during storm events. This includes subsurface detention basins connected to a bioswale, replacing asphalt with permeable pavers, and retrofitting our largest pond that feeds into the city's sewer system with a smart sensor that will control the outlet valve, draining the water level down 24 hours ahead of a storm, increasing the pond's capacity to collect and store stormwater runoff. Additionally, a water harvesting system will be installed at the pond so that we can use this water to irrigate our gardens and newly planted trees and reduce potable water consumption by 8 million gallons a year. The climate crisis is now, and it demands that private institutions join their public counterparts, along with city and state governments, to make radical changes. May I?
Your time is expired, but I would like to ask you the question of it. Seems like you have more to add to this hearing. I would like to ask you to add what you can to this hearing.
Thank you. No green space in New York City, public or private, big or small, is an island. What happens at Greenwood does not just affect us all, but all those who live around us. We hope that our work sets a model for the city's largest green spaces. I'd like to personally invite members of this committee to visit Greenwood and see the forward-looking work we're doing to benefit Brooklynites and all of us as we battle the effects of climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for responding to my request to put on the record, the good things that the Greenwood Cemetery is doing. I've been there many times, and I agree with you that it's important that institutions like yours play whatever role they can. In your case, it's about 1 million gallons a week. That doesn't make it into the sewer system because of your good efforts. And I'm happy that you were supported in that. And I'm sorry that I mispronounced your name, but I'll know better next time. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
The next witness is Theodora Macris, it looks like, representing the Center for New York City Neighborhoods.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Theodora Macris, and I'm a senior program manager at the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. I would like to thank Committee Chair Gennaro and members of the Committee on Environmental Protection, Resiliency, and Waterfronts for holding today's hearing. The center promotes and protects affordable homeownership, so middle and working class families are able to build strong, thriving communities. And since our founding in 2008, we and our network partners have assisted over 280,000 homeowners with matters ranging from foreclosure prevention, climate-related disaster recovery, flood insurance, and more. The center also administers floodhelpny.org, a digital platform for engaging New Yorkers on their flood risk in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice and the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery. The truth is that the climate is changing faster than we're able to keep up with, and household health, safety, and financial security is under serious threat, and New York City is unprepared to deal with the inevitable effects of climate change. FEMA's 2016 assessment of the 100-year floodplain projects that 183,000 residential units in our city are at risk of flooding, but notably, these maps are nearly 10 years out of date, and the increase in both frequency and severity of rainfall flooding, a peril unmapped by FEMA, suggests that neighborhoods located outside of the special flood hazard area are at risk. That being said, the city has already identified solutions. A report published by the New York City's Extreme Weather Task Force advocated with urgency the immediate need for policies to adapt to our increasing flood risk. Some of the recommendations included expanding backwater valve installations to the city's most vulnerable residential topologies to prevent sewer backups, and accelerating high-level storm sewer upgrades to prepare for intense rainfall flooding. Taking action now will save us time, money, and lives. After Hurricane Sandy, the city of Hoboken immediately invested in stormwater management, and when the September 29 flash flood hit the region last year, they collected 1.4 million gallons of rainwater in a single day, and were back on their feet a day later. That same storm brought New York City to a grinding halt and resulted in roughly $100 million in damages. Is that my time?
If you're close to the end, I'll give you the latitude to finish up.
Oh, sure. Just the comparison couldn't have been more striking, and the moment for bold and immediate action is now to protect human life and our city's future. We applaud the City Council for the suite of climate adaptation bills that have been introduced. They directly address the range of stormwater and infrastructure-related issues facing our city, and we advocate for their swift passage into law. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for coming out and testifying and showing your support. Thank you. And showing that I really need glasses. I look down at this witness slip and I see Eric Goldstein, my friend of like forever, is like in the house. I didn't even see him. And but here it is. Here's your slip. It's a welcome. Well, I shouldn't be surprised that you're here, but I didn't know. So this is. So Eric, always a pleasure to see you, and
Good afternoon, Chairman Gennaro, Councilmember Holden. I'm Eric Goldstein, New York City Environment Director at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Thanks for your leadership in convening this important hearing. As we all know, climate change is real. Ice caps are melting, forests are burning, temperatures are rising. And in one of the most significant impacts for New York City residents, flooding is increasing. That's not only along the 500 miles of coast, but in many low-lying land areas, some of which used to be natural wetlands. Flooding and stormwater impacts are increasing both in frequency and intensity. Just in the last 2 years, we had, in addition to Hurricane Ida, the unnamed rainstorm last September, both of which far exceeded historic rainfall levels and overwhelmed our existing sewage and stormwater systems. Unless we take further and more aggressive action to capture stormwater, the impacts will be increasingly serious and increasingly dangerous. Property will be damaged, infrastructure will be impaired, lives will be lost. The Commissioner's testimony today suggests that the Department understands these threats and is beginning to take them seriously as their stormwater resilience planning efforts indicate. But I want to focus on one critical aspect of the solution, any solution to the problem of increased flooding and the needs for greater resilience, and that's money. The DEP is already spending $1 billion a year on capital projects, and if we want the agency to expedite flood resilience projects, they'll have to spend more. That's both for gray and green infrastructure. But we can't just keep raising water rates and to generate the needed funds. Water rates are regressive. They're not based on income. They impact low-income New Yorkers disproportionately. It's not fair to place the burden of controlling climate-related flooding and constructing needed green and gray infrastructure projects disproportionately on low-income residents. One available source of funding that can and must be made available is the so-called water system rental payments. The New York City Water Board, one of the little-noticed city...
Please continue, because this is very important.
Thank you. The New York City Water Board, one of the little-noticed city-controlled agencies involved in delivering clean water to the city, pays rent to use the system of reservoirs, aqueducts, tunnels, and pipes to the city's general fund. What this unfair and illogical rental payment structure means is that water ratepayers are paying to subsidize non-water-related city expenditures. This makes no sense and for years has been the subject on the verge of reform, as you well know. Then Mayor de Blasio, for example, pledged to forego these rental payments and did not request any payment from the water system to cover non-water-related programs in FY22. But Mayor Adams is changing course and not in the right direction. In the mayor's just released executive budget, if I read it correctly, the mayor is seeking to take a rental payment of $295 million for non-water-related purposes. This is robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's a regressive move and a reversal of previous policy decisions. The council should do everything in its power to reverse this attempt to take much-needed funds away from water ratepayers. Another place we must turn to for needed stormwater and resiliency fundings is the state. For example, despite encouraging language in the governor's recent State of the State speech, in which he committed to advancing a floodplain buyout program, no funds have yet been made available to New York City for this purpose. On another important related funding issue, the long overdue replacement of lead service lines, the state's distribution of funds to New York City has shortchanged the city, and in particular environmental justice communities where the needs are greatest and childhood lead poisoning exposure should not be tolerated. We urge the council to use its good offices to press the state to open the tap and make funds available not only for the city's emerging voluntary flood buyout program, but for stepped up and much needed stormwater resiliency projects as well. One last point, regarding Intros 814, which would update stormwater management plans and reports, and Intro 815, which would spur creation of inland flood hazard mapping and planning and resilient construction for inland areas. We support the intents of both of these bills, although we have not examined them in detail, and urge that the council take the commissioner up on his offer this morning to work with you on the details of these bills. It's worth seeing if this committee, under your leadership, and the department can reach common ground on how to move forward in these two important areas. Finally, we support the proposed resolution. That's the subject of today's hearing, and we thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Eric. Always great to see you. I just want to reply to some of the things that you mentioned. First of all, we're going to be having an upcoming hearing on like the lead service lines, and so that is coming, soon to be announced. Regarding you were talking about the
rental payments?
Well, no, I'm saving that for last. And then the governor and opening up like money for what was that about again?
Well, the governor, floodplain buyouts.
Okay, floodplain buyouts. Okay, I would urge Nabby, whom you well know, to make sure that I, through her, am fully up to speed with all that and can weigh in. And on the rental payment, it's worse than what you said. The mayor is seeking to do a full $300 million-ish, rental payment for the upcoming year. Wants to do a reach back into this fiscal year, which is not ended, for a total of $440 million of FY24 and FY25. And if my information is correct, he proclaimed that there will be full rental payments as far as the eye can see. Now, the council is limited in its ability because it's a state-created thing that gave the water board the ability to do this. We've seen, Jim Tripp and other warriors kind of, fight this fight. I'm doing everything I can. I mean, we're working on a bill now that would make the mayor disclose that this is what he intends to do. But there's no, and $440 million in the budget that we're going to do. If next year there's a full rental payment, then only the year after that. So within 2 years from now, that'll be more than $1 billion out of what water and sewer ratepayers pay that will not have anything to do with water and sewer. I mean, this is completely unsustainable and, inconsistent with what the commissioner has in terms of his vision of how much can we reasonably expect people to pay to build out, all of the capacity, both green, gray, everything, to do what we need to do. Scores of billions of dollars will be needed, and we can't waste a penny. And water rates on their own are, as you indicated, are not progressive. But the least, like the most regressive thing imaginable is a hidden tax on, water and sewer that has nothing to do with water and sewer, that disproportionately affects those that can least afford to pay. Because the poorest New Yorkers don't have the ability to, eat out at night or go on vacation for 3 weeks a year, or what. They are in that apartment, cooking those meals on that stove, bathing those kids in that tub, and for those who own their own domicile. If they don't, then they're in a rent stabilized unit. Their costs are going to go up based on the landlords having to pay higher water fees due to the rental payment. So I couldn't be more on board with you than this and try to legislate this, but I'm going to continue to bang this drum and would eagerly accept your partnership on this. And we should get Jim Tripp back too, whatever he's up to.
Terrific. See, thank you, Chair Gennaro. I am not sure how many of the council members understand the intricacies of this very complex program. I suspect if they did, that there would be some political outcry, and that there would be a political response as part of the budget negotiations as well.
This is something that I'm walking on eggshells trying to do. But yes, I was around in OMB when this was created. I worked in the Capital Division of OMB from 83 to 86, when this all came about, when they wanted to go to a fee-for-service, they wanted to get DEP out of the capital budget, and it kind of all made sense. You know, people have to, you know, rather than just paying by frontage, a term that only you and I, you know, understand in this room. It's a flat rate. There was, you know, no incentive to conserve water, and so everything was good, except for kind of the back end of the rental payment, because of course the rental payment was created to pay off the pre-1985, you know, general obligation DEP capital debt. That made sense, but
Which has been done.
Which has been done, and so, but you know, OMB, you know, put a Trojan horse in there. So now the rental payment is equal to 15% of the debt service of the city's Water Finance Authority, and it's free money on the table for you know, OMB, and they have chosen to avail themselves of that, and it's up to, you know, it's up to folks to kind of push back in a political way to make sure that this doesn't continue, because this is completely unsustainable. So with that said, I have to get through the other witnesses. I have a doctor appointment, surprise, surprise, and so
Thank you.
yeah, and so Eric, always great to see you, and come back every time, not any time, every time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The point is, if we're going to address the needed stormwater programs that we need throughout the city, we can't be spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year on rental payments that have no impact on water ratepayers.
It's a, to quote Woody Allen, I think it's a mockery of a travesty of a sham or whatever, or it was something like that in one of his movies. Thank you, Eric. Okay. We will now turn to remote testimony. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the Sergeant at Arms will give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the Sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. I read that too? Not yet. Okay. 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 First witness, Alia, if I'm not saying that right, Samro of New York League of Conservation Voters.
Starting time.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Alia Sumro, and I'm the Deputy Director for New York City Policy at the New York League of Conservation Voters. Thank you, Chair Gennaro, as well as members of the Committee on Environmental Protection, for the opportunity to testify today. I have submitted longer written comments. The latest projections from the New York City Panel on Climate Change project that the city will be hotter, rainier, and wetter as soon as the 2030s. As summer approaches, we must not lose sight of the short, medium, and long-term measures our city must take to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. This includes the compounding impacts on our city's waterways and sewer infrastructure, such as coastal storm surge, high tide flooding, rising groundwater, and extreme rainfall, the last of which can trigger CSOs sending sewage, industrial waste, and other pollutants into the city's waterways. As stated in NYLCV's 2024 New York City Policy Agenda, the city must continue to explore ways to reduce CSOs by funding and maintaining green infrastructure projects such as rain gardens, bioswales, water squares, river daylighting, and permeable pavement. This helps absorb stormwater, it purifies the air, and it mitigates the urban heat island effect. In addition to interim storm measures such as improving communication and clearing catch basins, the city must also continue updating and modernizing our existing sewer system and wastewater treatment processes. The city must also continue prioritizing environmental justice and equity in all of its climate and environmental planning, implementation, and policies. For instance, according to the recently released EJ/NYC report, 7 out of the top 10 neighborhoods with the most confirmed sewer backup complaints reported to 311 in 2022 are in EJ neighborhoods. Green and gray infrastructure projects should continue to be expanded and implemented equitably with priority for frontline communities that have borne the brunt of environmental racism and climate injustices, including NYCHA campuses.
Thank you so much. Your time has expired.
Okay, thank you. Just lastly, I do want to make a plug for providing sufficient funding for DEP and MOCEJ staffing. We must fund these climate and environmental programs if we want to implement them. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Before I call the next witness, I just have to make reference to something on my device. I apologize. I don't want to do this while someone is speaking. Okay, now what's the next witness? Next witness is Dinu Ahmed. Dinu Ahmed.
Starting time.
Hello, I don't think I've been, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dino Ahmed, and I'm a public defender and a longtime resident of East Elmhurst. I'm actually calling in from my basement office right now because East Elmhurst has been dealing with toxic sewage waste for decades now. The first storm that I can recall was back in 2007 when my family's home, our garage, our basement dealt with 3 feet of sewage, toxic sewage backup. And then when Hurricane Ida happened on September 1st, we had over 5 feet, which led to catastrophic damages. And I was in the basement just minutes earlier. The water entered with such force that the front door of my basement was ripped off completely. The back door was waterlogged. And so had I been down there, I do not think that I would have been able to get out. It was a certain death trap. On my block, a few doors down, one of my neighbors made a desperate call to her partner for assistance and had to climb up on a table to stay above the water. Ultimately, other neighbors had to pull her out of the window in order for her to survive. And so I'm testifying today because when Hurricane Ida happened, East Elmhurst was at the center of international news coverage, and we had President Biden come down here, and yet in all this time, we've not seen any structural improvements on our block and within our neighborhood. 2 years later, in 2023, I experienced 3 episodes of sewage backup. When the remnants of Tropical Storm Ophelia hit us, I found myself gutting our basement for the 2nd time in 2 years. And in my haste to go grab everything that I needed out of the basement, I actually ended up getting electrocuted and did not realize at first that a current was flowing through my body. And so I'm testifying on behalf of East Elmhurst because we have a significant elder and immigrant population. I do think that in many ways we are seeing our neighborhood neglected in this process.
Thank you so much. Your time has expired.
Please finish your thought.
Thank you so much. You know, we've seen in neighboring Maspeth, there's been a massive multi-million-dollar investment in sewer upgrades, and in conversations with community board members there, they've not seen anything along the likes of the multiple feet of backup that we've experienced. And so we're really talking about fear about our lives, fear about, you know, further fatalities. And I understand that there are funding pressures here, but I'm just wondering what the price tag is if we incur one more fatality. And just briefly, there was a community forum that was held here in our neighborhood in February through the leadership of some of the residents that are actually here today to testify. And, you know, at that forum, we were told that there is going to be a 17-month drainage study followed by 2 years of design work, and to not expect any sewer upgrades, at least at the earliest until 2027. And so I'm just saying, like, we are frightened of what may happen in those next few years, and we have a lot of questions about how communities are being prioritized for sewer upgrades. I think there are major differences between communities that are dealing with, you know, a couple of inches versus 5, 6, 7 feet of sewage flooding as we've been experiencing here. And we want to know about the federal funds that were promised to us when President Biden came in 2021 and how those funds are being allocated. We've asked all of our electeds and nobody seems to have an answer about what agency is overseeing those funds and how community input will be collected. So those are my thoughts for right now, and I'm happy to submit longer written testimony after.
Thank you. We would certainly urge you to submit any relevant testimony that, and it will be duly considered, and particularly what you just, you're right in the shadow of where DEP is located, and we will pass this along to the commissioner. Thank you very much for your very, very good testimony, and I'm so sorry for your troubles.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness is Aracelia Cook.
Starting time.
Thank you so much. My name is Aracelia Cook, and I'm the president of the 149th South Ozone Park Civic Association, and also a member of Square Ridge, Southeast Queens Resident Environmental Justice Coalition. One of the things I would like to bring out, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see, I had to click that. One of the things I would like to bring out is the fact that since November 2019, where we had the sewage backup over here in Southeast Queens, and over 300 some homes were inundated with raw sewage. Many of these residents have not been made whole. Every time it rains, a lot of the neighbors are going down, looking in their basements, seeing what's going on. We know that when you do call DEP, one of the things that he stated, the commissioner, when the 311 calls that we make to DEP is usually closed, and they are closed and the blame is put on the residents. We definitely need transparency when it comes to these bills that's being introduced, so that this city can really, DEP can take accountability for what's going on in communities of color. The other thing we were promised to have a hearing with DEP back in 2019. Now, this is almost 5 years later. We still have not had a hearing with DEP and to really voice what our concerns are. Many homeowners have purchased sub pumps. Some of them is working. Some of them still need to have other assistance. So, and also with the backflows that some residents have actually purchased. So this, also the information that the DEP gave about these flow maps. These flow maps should include neighborhoods of color, because I don't know how they selected these homes or how they collaborated on these maps, but it does not seem like it connects to my community and what our needs are.
Thank you. Your time has expired.
Thank you. And also one last thing, my
Sure.
son was born on Earth Day. Thank you.
Oh, good for you.
1977.
Good for you. Thank you very much. And I just have to have a brief sidebar with my colleague before I call the next witness. And for the next witness, it is a privilege for me to call upon my friend William, or as we know him, Bill Scarborough.
Starting time.
Thank you, Chairman Gennaro and council members. My name is William Scarborough. I'm a former state assembly member representing the 29th Assembly District in Queens. I'm currently the president of the Southeast Queens Residents Environmental Justice Coalition, and I'm also the president of the Ashley Park Civic Organization in Queens. I'm speaking in support of Intro 403, which we were told was going to be part of this hearing, a local law proposed by Public Advocate Jemani Williams. This bill would require the Department of Environmental Protection to submit quarterly reports detailing the inspection, cleaning, and maintenance of catch basins. Additionally, DEP would be required to ensure that catch basins are inspected at least annually, and catch basins that are clogged would be addressed within 5 days. We strongly support this legislation. Our area, Southeast Queens, as the chair knows, is subject to persistent flooding. Many residents, institutions, and businesses suffer from flooding in their basements 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Part of the problem is a high water table. Another part of the problem is a lack of sewer infrastructure, which requires build out. And the third part is that the lack of regular maintenance of our catch basins and sewers and delays in addressing clogged or malfunctioning catch basins. We've had numerous meetings with the DEP and requested information about the scheduling of catch basin maintenance. My recollection is that they outlined a schedule where each board was addressed roughly every 2 years, but this information was never conveyed in writing. To my knowledge, there is no place on the DEP website or elsewhere for the public to access a catch basin maintenance schedule. This legislation would require the DEP provide regular reports to the council and the public advocate, and maintenance be done annually. This would be a great benefit to our community. We would also ask that there be a site on the website where interested citizens can access this information regarding maintenance schedules and repairs or unclogging of catch
Please
basins.
continue. Please continue.
We are also in support of Intro 814 by Councilmember Gennaro. DEP is acutely aware of areas that regularly flood, and this legislation would push DEP to proactively identify and address these locations. Thank you for your consideration, and it's always good to see you, Chairman Gennaro. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Always great to see you, and say hi to all my good friends, Manny Kaufman, and everybody that you work with in the vineyard.
We're still fighting the good fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank God we're all young, and so
yes, indeed.
Really appreciate your good testimony. Really happy that you're still fighting the good fight for the people of Southeast Queens, and they always did have a great advocate in you, and they still do, and everyone should be grateful for your efforts. And we really appreciate your presence here today, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill. And because I have, just for the record, my good colleague Bob Holden is going to fill in as chair for the remainder of this hearing. I have a doctor appointment that I'm going to be a little late for as it is, and I'm very grateful to Councilmember Holden for chairing the rest of this hearing. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. And then thank you again, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call on Suhali Mendez from the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. My name is Suhali Mendez. I am the Policy and Legislative Coordinator in New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. I would like to thank the Committee on Environmental Protection, Resiliency, and Waterfronts for holding this hearing and allowing me the opportunity to provide testimony today. I would like to share that New York Lawyers for the Public Interest is in strong support to Intro 814, the proposed resolution of 144A, along with Public Advocate Jomani Williams' Intro 403. We further encourage the city to ensure that Home Fix 2.0 runs and receives adequate funding to cover the major gaps and assistance needed to fund flood resiliency measures in homes and private property. Too many of our neighbors are underwater with flooded basements, as some of you have heard from previous testimonies, and the financial stress and health problems that flooding causes. Extreme rainfall events have already increased and will continue to increase in number with severity because of fossil fuel climate change. Communities in which New York City has historically invested less money and resources tend to be Black, brown, and low-income communities, which are disproportionately bear the burdens of flooding and sewage backups. For example, residents in Queens, the city's most racially diverse borough, made over 4,000 backup complaints involving private sewer systems to the New York City Department of Environmental Protection 2022 alone, which is nearly 6 times as many as Manhattan. And sewer backups make residents' environments unsafe, healthy, and inhumane, which interferes with their constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. Now is the time for our elected leaders to act and fix these issues before many homes and livelihoods are ruined by flooding. We urge the city to give more support directly to homeowners through programs
Time
like
is
Home Fix.
have expired.
Okay, I'll add just one more thought. Currently, residents are left to cover the costs of cleaning and repairing flood damage, which can cost tens of thousands of dollars, and the availability of grants and loans for repairs, upgrades, and cleanup costs will make a massive difference. Retrofitting homes is often far too costly for homeowners, and the city must ensure that homeowners have the support they need in order to stay safely above water. Thank you for your consideration and support, and a more detailed testimony will be submitted.
Thank you for your
again.
testimony. Our final witness is Nabil Jamaluddin.
Starting time.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Nabil Jamaluddin here, resident of East Elmhurst, software engineer. I wanted to second everything Dinu said. We experienced a lot of the same issues in our part of East Elmhurst, but in the last 2 storms, since Hurricane Ida and this last Tropical Storm Ophelia. Many basements were devastated through the sewer backup, resulting in thousands of dollars in lost items and damage across the neighborhood, especially on my block where pretty much all of my neighbors flooded. We received little to no green infrastructure in our part of East Elmhurst, although a lot of green infrastructure has been implemented across the neighborhood in different parts of the neighborhood, although that is still very much lacking in the amount of catch basins or rain gardens that can help divert water away from homes or prevent water from entering the sewers to begin with. Which leads me to another issue in the neighborhood. There are street ponds across the neighborhood that do not help the situation at all. These ponds almost never evaporate. Some are 30 feet long, leading to unsanitary living conditions for many of the residents in the neighborhood and harboring mosquitoes and making the flooding that happens during heavy rainfall a much more troublesome issue for everyone in the neighborhood. I strongly support proposed resolution 144A, which would allow for additional funding for the stormwater infrastructure, as well as greatly benefit the neighborhood. Also, would like to ask for additional rain gardens and catch basins, since some blocks don't even have even one catch basin to help divert water away from the stormwater system. Additionally, I would like to call for regular cleaning of sewer mains, in addition to the regular maintenance of catch basins, which was proposed in Intro 403. It is critical that the DEP ensures that sewer mains are properly cleaned on the regular schedule of every 3 to 5 years to prevent
Thank
basement
you.
flooding
Your time has expired.
Thank you. The rest will be in the fuller testimony. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. If we missed anyone that has registered to testify today and has yet to be called, please use the Zoom raise hand function if you are testifying remotely, and you will be called in order of your hand was raised. If you are testifying in person, please come to the dais. Seeing no one, I will now close this hearing. Thank you, members of the administration and members of the public who have joined us today to discuss this very important topic. This hearing is now adjourned.